Hello, everyone. My name is John Williams. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I welcome you to our monthly live show on LinkedIn, Leadership at the Edge, sharing ideas across the community of leadership practice in every context, everywhere. Each month, I'm joined by senior leaders from around the world to discuss their real life experiences, to challenge some outdated leadership practices, and to offer a fresh take on the issues that today's leaders face. We invite you to join the conversation and add your questions and reflections in the comment section. Today, we're going to be visiting, or should I say revisiting, the slightly edgy challenge of reimagining leadership. And I'm privileged to have the Director of Reimagining Leadership, Dr. Jim Hamill, with me today. Jim is a 30-year veteran of international development and has, I think, probably one of the sharpest minds in putting together technology and leadership development that I've yet come across. So, Jim, welcome to you, sir.
Morning, John. Thanks for the invite, and thanks to Becky for organising, and thank you for everyone who's attending. Look forward to an interesting session.
Yeah, Jim. Well, to be honest, it's a very nice sunny day outside, but I've noticed I've been spending the last few weeks increasingly going into people's offices, actually, for meetings now, as we get back to this idea of it's okay to have some face-to-face meetings and all that sort of stuff. I was going to ask you, how far from a leadership perspective, how far do you think things like the hybrid or remote working, the 4-day work week, the 6-hour day, how far do you think those things are relevant for leaders themselves as opposed to the teams that they actually lead?
Yeah, good question. Good question to start with, John. I think it is very important for leaders. I mean, a lot of these issues, and they are being discussed extensively. A lot of these issues are more management-related issues rather than leadership issues, but ultimately it is the leader's responsibility to direct this. But I would also say that the discussion that's taking place in terms of back to the office, hybrid working, work from home, 4-day week, and so on, those are obviously very interesting and challenging issues, and they do raise a lot of issues relating to workforce engagement, culture. You know, if we do move to a hybrid way of working, do we generate a 2-tier career development path where people in the office take priority over people at home? How do we maintain organizational culture? How do we maintain collaboration? What happens in terms of mental health issues and so on? So there's a very wide range of issues there. Yeah. But in addition to that, in addition to looking at where or when work takes place, we really need to be, if we are going to adopt a future-looking perspective here, we need to look at the how and the why we work. And those two issues in particular are leadership issues. You know, one of the main problems I'm seeing, and I'm like you, John, I'm going back to in the offices and visiting companies. One of the challenges I see is that people are becoming frazzled, whether they're in the office or whether they're at home. And a lot of that is down to excessive bureaucracy, inefficient work practices, the failure to apply digital technologies properly to streamline and automate processes. And those issues, the how we work issues, I think are equally as important, if not more important, than the where and when we work. And those are very much leadership issues.
That's really interesting, Jim. Yeah, because in a way, deciding whether or not we should be at the office or working from home or working 4 days, whatever it is, it feels like jumping to a solution when we haven't actually really defined what the problem is. As you said,
Yes.
why are we working and how are we working in certain ways? That should tell us whether or not we then need to be in the office 4 days a week or 5 days a week or whatever it is. Very interesting, especially this idea of people being frazzled, because I remember when the pandemic first started, we very quickly got a view of what adds value and what doesn't. And we stopped doing things that didn't add value because actually we needed to in a sense, to demonstrate performance, to perform.
Yeah.
Maybe having got over that, now we've allowed as you said, the bureaucracy to creep back, and that conversation is now becoming messy, very messy, and people are frazzled because actually they don't have the clarity on what is adding value and what is not, particularly around where they should be. Interesting. How far do you think the international agenda, international connections and connectivity and cultures will influence not just the way that we work, but the leadership behavior that we see people demonstrate?
Well, again, John, I can only answer that question from a personal experience point of view. And I've been fortunate in my career to have travelled extensively and delivered workshops and so on in I think it's 20 different countries. And I have learned an awful lot from those international connections. I'll give you just two very quick examples, which I think are very relevant to what we're talking about today, the need to reimagine leadership. Back in the mid-1990s, to cut a long story short, back in the mid-1990s, I was in charge of a Strathclyde Business School program in Singapore.
Yeah.
And it was a distance learning program. That's what we called it in those days. And I was out there one night and I was doing a recruitment presentation using acetate slides on an overhead projector.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
people remember that, then they're the same age as us. And at the end of the session, I was asked the question, if we join this program and if we are based in Singapore and the professors are based in Glasgow, will we be able to email the professors? Yeah. Now, this is 1994.
Right.
And I immediately said, yeah, of course you can. That's not a problem. And when everyone left the room, I turned to my colleague and said, what the hell is an email? And that one question totally and utterly changed my life, because I said to myself then, my customers are wanting to communicate electronically with me. I need to get on this journey, because we were relying on faxes and telephone calls and so on. If I can bring that right up to date now, as you know, I'm doing some work in Saudi Arabia at the moment. And if you look at the leadership approach in Singapore and in Saudi Arabia, if you look at the progress that they are making, especially in my area of digital and digital support transformation, we have a ton of lessons to learn from those two countries.
Right. Now, I want to come back to that if I can, Jim, because that's actually really an important point. Before we do that, one of the comments that's just been put up, Richard Ellis has said, we're talking about being frazzled and things. In a hybrid environment, it's even more important for leaders to lead by example and not do the sort of insane hours that used to be expected. And Richard says, in his experience, conversations have become more open since COVID started. So two really important points there, maybe. One is leaders must lead by example. And secondly, leaders must expect to have more open conversations with their teams. And maybe that's one of the ways to overcome the frazzlement, if you like.
Yeah. I would agree wholeheartedly with the first comment and probably with the second comment there. I mean, one of the, I think every organisation is quite proud of the fact that they kept the lights on when we hit lockdown. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we moved to remote working fairly quickly, simply because we had to. But it became apparent that the side effect of that was increased stress, mental health, and so on. And I've got a lot of sympathy for senior managers and leaders on this, because they were putting a lot of pressure on their staff because there was a lot of pressure on them, and
Right.
we were entering
Right.
new territory.
Yeah.
And the way I like to explain this is, if I email someone at 10 o'clock at night because it's convenient for me to email someone at that time, then that's fine.
Yep.
But I do not expect them to answer at 10 o'clock at night. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm actually a big fan of asynchronized working, that we don't always need to work at the same time.
Yep.
But that requires proper implementation. In terms of Richard's second point about open discussion, I would say that's probably true to a large extent as well. But unfortunately, there are also organisations where that discussion just isn't taking place, and we have basically been ordered back to the status quo.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate and interesting. The idea that leaders should role model behaviors, and your point about sending emails at 10 p.m. And I'm the same. I send emails at odd times. Yeah. The crucial thing about that, I think, is to very clearly identify within the organization the rules that govern demands on the team. Because like you, I have absolutely no expectation that somebody would respond out of whatever their normal working hours are to an email from me. However, it needs to be really clear to everybody that that's the case. I noticed a question from Matt Barkley about advice on integrating new team members into the hybrid and home working environment, particularly around culture. We might need to take this offline and actually generate a conversation about this afterwards, Jim, I think, because there's an awful lot of stuff in that comment and question that bears quite a lot of conversation, I think.
Yeah. Again, it's a very interesting question. I'll be very brief on this, John. I've been running programs for the last 3 or 4 years with one of the largest housing associations in the UK, and the last program I ran with them was with their graduate. It was the new graduates into the organisations who basically hadn't yet stepped foot inside the building. That they had been in the organisation for 2 years and hadn't set foot inside the building. And obviously there's a downside to that, but the upside, and this might be a little bit controversial, is that the ideas that group of young people were generating in terms of new ways of working were quite innovative and quite exciting.
Right.
And simply because they hadn't been institutionalized into the way we do things around here. By having to attend the office 5 days a week. So there can be a positive aspect to this, but the whole onboarding thing of new employees is obviously one of the challenges of hybrid working. But there is a danger that if you do that onboarding totally in the traditional way, that you're just institutionalizing people in the old ways of doing things.
Yeah, and actually not terribly well if it's being done virtually and trying to replicate the old ways of doing things. But definitely, Matt, I think we'd like to extend that conversation offline afterwards if we can. Jim, if I can just come back to the point you mentioned earlier on about particularly around the digital example, if I can use that word, of countries that we see around the world. I remember when I was in Singapore, this was about 4 years ago, I think, and I was sharing a platform with somebody, reasonably big audience, and he said to the audience, "Are you ready for learning in real time?" And I on stage, I looked at him and I thought, that's learning in real time is an incredible concept, actually, a bit like the movie The Matrix, where I need a program to fly this helicopter. There's a program to fly the helicopter and stuff.
Yeah.
We may not get that far quite so quickly. However, there is is there an opportunity for technology to take us closer to learning in real time? And what impact would that have on leadership behavior?
Well, I mean, there's no reason I can think of why we're not going to get there. The technology is either already available or will very quickly become available to allow that to happen.
Yep.
We have the technology dexterity, the technology capabilities to make that happen. Whether we have the leadership dexterity to make that happen is a completely different issue. As you know, John, I spent a lot of my career in higher education, and I'm just not sure that higher education has got the organizational dexterity or the leadership dexterity to move quickly on that. So to me, it's not a technology issue; it's a leadership challenge.
Right.
And I don't want to take a hammer to my old sector, but higher education has expressed how proud it's been in being able to pivot to online lectures and keep students on programs and so on. But an online lecture of 3 hours is still a lecture.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a standard content delivered to, if it's a first year undergraduate class, it's 400 people.
Right.
So standard content delivered in a standard way, whether it's face-to-face or online. Real-time learning will also be personalized learning.
Yep.
Yeah. Will be personalized to the needs of, or the specific needs and interests of different learners.
Yeah,
so exciting opportunities there. It requires leaders to reimagine how they operate.
Absolutely. And very interesting thought for me, just as you were talking there, came to me, Jim, about this idea of real-time learning, and particularly the personalization of it, the need for it to be really granular, because if it's going to happen in real time, it needs to be the epitome of bite-sized chunks, really, so that people can learn and then apply almost immediately.
Well, I mean, there's pretty strong evidence to suggest, John, that one of the effects of digital is that it's rewired our brains, and that we tend to learn things horizontally rather than vertically. So in other words, we learn lots of little sound bites of information that over time builds up to detailed knowledge, rather than the way that we learn, where you take a subject and you study it in enormous detail. So all of those things have massive implications for the underlying strategy and the underlying business model of higher education.
Just picking up again on higher education then, Jim, because for me, the significance of higher education is that it has traditionally been a huge source of leaders for the future. And we still have in many countries people being pushed to go into higher education because that will fit them for a career in leadership of some sort. But if we now see that higher education is lagging the demand for development, how does that impact two things: the leadership that comes out of higher education and the leadership within higher education itself?
Well, in terms of the leadership that comes out of higher education, we need to make sure that we are creating or helping to create the leaders of the future, instead of just retaining the status quo. And for me, tinkering is no is not an option, to be quite honest. We need to undertake a radical reassessment, and we're focusing on higher education, but I think this is true of almost every sector, that we need to undertake a radical reassessment of every aspect of our organization, whether it's strategy, whether it's our use of digital, whether it's organization, people, culture aspect, as well as the leadership aspect.
So that reassessment, who should drive that? Should it be demand from employees, from teams? Should it be demand from leaders, not only of their organizations, but obviously of their suppliers like higher education? What do you think? Who should be driving that?
For me, John, it needs to be top down and bottom up. So basically, the answer is everyone. If you've not got the direction coming from the very top of the organisation that it's time to reassess, then it just ain't going to happen. Let's be honest about it. But some of the most creative ideas for reimagining how things are done come from empowering high-performing frontline teams.
Right.
But they must operate within an environment that is supportive of innovation and changing the way we do things. So to me, it's top down and bottom up.
And just think, because technology is also part of your background, how far can technology support that transition? Because we talk a lot about, for example, digital transformation. You and I have said before, most people think of the digital rather than the transformation. How can we, in a sense, move people's minds to focus on the transformation and use technology to make it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen comments that organizations have transformed in the last 2 years through digital. Okay, we've seen tremendous progress in the use of digital technologies in the last 2 years. There's absolutely no doubt at all about that. Whether that has led to transformation is a completely different issue. Yeah, we're using digital without being digital. So the way I look at this is that the last 2 years have been about using digital to build resilience, to keep our organizations working during COVID-19. With that experience, we now need to think about, and this goes back to your earlier question about ways of working, we now need to think about how we can use digital to reimagine how we do things, and the impact of digital on our strategy, our organization, our people, culture, and so on. But there's a third aspect to this, and this is looking more towards the future, and the future is like next year, not 10 years. We're seeing the emergence now of, it's called various things, but basically Web 3.0 technologies. So you're seeing everything from this thing called the metaverse, seeing artificial intelligence, automation, Internet of Things, blockchain technology, and so on. And those things, and the reason I mentioned my experience in Singapore in the 1990s, those technologies remind me of the 1990s, where we've seen this new thing called the internet. We didn't really know what it was about, but we knew it was going to transform the way we lived and worked and played. And I have the same feeling now about Web 3.0. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, and leaders in particular, to get up the learning curve on these technologies. We do not need to become technical experts, but we need to start understanding the business impact of these technologies.
I think that's so fundamental, Jim, really. The point that you make, we don't have to be technical experts. We need to understand what these things will do to our role as leaders, as organizations, as whatever it is. Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, Dr. Rob Milford has mentioned he found that collaborative leadership styles have become more necessary in the post-COVID, and actually well into the future, I think. Actually, that idea of collaborative leadership lends itself quite nicely to the idea of acquiring digital skills, if you like, in the organization, if we utilize those people who are already digitally native, which is generally speaking the generations before me. Sorry, after me, not before me, the generations that come after me. So collaboration is not about you and I collaborating necessarily, Jim. Yeah. It's about our collaborating vertically within organizations. Do you think that's a useful interpretation of what Rob has said?
Well, I think it's one interpretation, and I'm a big fan of what's known as reverse mentoring. I think older, more mature people can learn an awful lot from digital natives. I've got 2 grandsons, and the youngest one's 6, and he's on the metaverse. He plays Roblox and so on, and I have no idea what it's about, but I need to learn what it's about. But I think the issue of collaboration and digital is a lot wider than that. As I mentioned earlier, there was an interesting article from the World Economic Forum just last week, and it might be worthwhile tracking it down, who talked about Web 3.0 and its impact on organizational structures. And they were talking about Web 3.0 technology leading to what they called decentralized autonomous enterprises or decentralized autonomous organizations. Right. So basically it was an organization that operated more on cooperative techniques rather than corporation techniques. It was an organization that operated through collaboration with flat networks rather than hierarchy and bureaucracy. So I think Rob's comment about collaboration goes a lot wider than just collaboration within an organization. And I know of companies, there's a Dutch company called Buurtzorg that already operates on that model, and it's certainly a company it's worth looking at.
Jim, that's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I think we're going to have to draw it to a close in just a second. And interesting to see Chris Elliott's comment there, which feeds into your philosophy. And I know this is your philosophy for a long time. He says you don't need digital technology for a leader to have a good quality conversation. And as Richard says immediately afterwards, technology is a tool. And I know that's something that you've been promoting, Jim, for many years. Technology is a necessary and not sufficient transformer of organizations.
If we approach this from a technology point of view, it just ain't going to work. We're running out of time, but digital transformation, I never used that term. I don't think digital transforms anything on its own. I only use the term digital supported transformation.
Right. Very
it's a subtle difference, but a very important one. We cannot transform unless we're leveraging the full potential of digital, but digital on its own is not enough.
Brilliant. Jim, thank you so much. That's it for us for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My special thanks to our guest, Dr. Jim Hamill, and to you, the audience, for listening. Please do join the conversation via social media using the hashtag Leadership at the Edge. And additionally, carry on the conversation on The Hub, our community forum for leaders and managers at all levels. Getting involved is free, and you don't have to be a member of the Institute. If you're interested in accessing the Hub or finding out more about membership or future events at the Institute, please visit the website, www.institutelm.com, right there on your screen. Thank you to absolutely everybody for listening and for engaging. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, John, for inviting me.
Thanks, Jim.